Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 233. Lord Lymington. Part 1. There was an article that I came across and it was titled The Fake Lord at Hadley's Orient Hotel in Hobart. It said a colourful character the hotel saw through its doors was Lord Lymington, but not all was as it seemed. This was a guest who checked in and announced himself very proudly to be Lord Lymington, and he was apparently very charming and influential. But it all happened to be a case of false identity. He wasn't a lord at all. He had completely made up this story to escape and elope with another woman, even though he was already married with 9 children. The fake lord got away with it for a few days. He got a very special seat at the Theatre Royal and got treated very well for a while. After some investigations, he was caught out and he had to stand trial facing charges of wife desertion. The man assuming the name Lord Lymington was in fact Thomas William Miller. He was born on the 30th of July 1863 in Newcastle, New South Wales. He was the eldest of 6 children, born to Thomas Tiller, who it seems changed his name once he emigrated to Australia from England in 1862. On the 15th of February 1886, it mentions Thomas Miller, and it says the Equitable Permanent Benefit Building, Land and Savings Institution assembled at their new premises at the corner of Pitt and Park Streets in Sydney. Mr. T. Miller is the manager of the society. He gave an account of its progress. He said the society commenced in April 1874 when a few gentlemen were called together by the present manager, Mr. Thomas Miller. The commencement was of very modest pretensions, business being transacted in an office of small accommodation. The little weakling has grown out of its modesty and it now occupies a leading position among kindred societies. So it seems that his father did quite well in business. His mother was Amelia Braddon Ward. She was also born in England, and Thomas and Amelia married on the 10th of May 1862 at the Scots Church in Churchill, New South Wales. Some of the family did a holiday over to Egypt in 1908, so again that's an indication that they were from quite an affluent family. Thomas Jr. married Sarah Jane Irish on the 6th of November 1884 at the Baptist Church at Petersham, New South Wales. Thomas was 21 and Sarah 17. They had Thomas III, Thomas Charles on the 16th of January 1886 in Newtown, and Eve Clarice on the 24th of August 1887. They lived at a home called St Elmo in Petersham, New South Wales. I'll place a fairly recent photo of their home on my Facebook page. It's quite a nice looking home. On the 16th of March 1889, in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, it first mentions Thomas Miller as Lord Lymington. There was a recollection in the Sydney Daily Telegraph on the 16th of March 1889 about the Lord Lymington episode in Hobart that occurred in March 1892. Some sensation was caused in this city on Monday evening last as the news spread that a person who has been posing here as Lord Lymington had been arrested, and various rumours were afloat as to the charge laid against him. The charge, it appeared, was that of deserting his wife and child in Sydney, where the warrant was issued, and where, as the telegram to the Superintendent of Police stated, they were then in a destitute condition. The real name of the accused is Thomas William Miller. He left his wife and child in Sydney and took up with a young lady named Miss Opie in Melbourne and travelled with her to Hobart. They arrived here on Friday and engaged apartments at the Orient Hotel as Honorary T.W. Miller and wife, and have been residing there up until the time of his arrest. On Friday night they attended the theatre and occupied a vice-regal box. On that occasion it was given out that they were Lord and Lady Lymington, and while some at least of those present had never heard of the title, credence was attached to the statement by the fact that he wore a crimson badge across his chest, supposed to be an insignia of some distinguished order. One or two of the clubs in Hobart had also been favoured with a visit from him. The first doubt as to his credentials appears to have arisen from his signing his name in the Hobart Club billiard room as Lord Lymington, instead of confining himself to the conventional aristocratic surname, as well as his utter ignorance of the Portsmouth family, to which, of course, the title in question belongs.
On several occasions, he's bestowed his patronage on Miss Johnny Lee and Mr. J.P. Burnett at their hotel as Lord Lymington, and he generally swelled round in demonstrative fashion. He was arrested at the Orient Hotel between 7 and 8 o'clock at night by Superintendent Pedder after some difficulty and conveyed to the police station. So impressed were the managers of the hotel with the importance of their distinguished visitor that they would not consent to intrude in his privacy. So on the 30th of March 1892, there was a notice in the New South Wales Police Gazette. A warrant has been issued by the Central Police Bench for the arrest of Thomas William Miller, charged with having at Sydney on the 14th unlawfully deserted his child, Thomas Charles Miller. The offender is 29, nearly 6 foot high, with a dark hair and moustache, a sallow complexion, straight nose and even teeth, well dressed, a surveyor. May be accompanied by a female of about 25 years of age, tall and fair, supposed to have left the colony en route to Europe. And on the 21st of April 1892 in the Hobart Mercury, the case of T.W. Miller. The charge of bigamy preferred by Superintendent Pedder against Thomas W. Miller, formerly known in Hobart as Lord Lymington, stands till further adjourned pending the ability of the accused to attend court. It will be remembered that the career of the accused in Hobart came to a somewhat abrupt termination, he being arrested by virtue of a telegram from the Chief Commissioner of the Sydney Police, charging him with deserting his child. On the day of his arrest, he was married at the Wesleyan Church to Miss Jenny Opie, who had accompanied him here. The charge of maintenance was withdrawn to make way for the graver accusation of bigamy, but as Miller was suddenly taken ill, he was unable to attend court. Since then, he's been housed at the Exchange Hotel, where he has been visited occasionally by an officer of police to ascertain the state of his health. He is allowed to take advantage of the present fine weather for outdoor exercise, with a humane view probably of reviving him as quickly as possible in order to stand his trial. Mr. T.S. Lindsay, who left for Victoria by the RMSS Ormst, is a material witness in the case, and his evidence cannot be very well taken alone, as Miller alleges that he cannot hear. It is obviously useless to give evidence before a man who is deaf, although he may perhaps be able to read the evidence put in writing before him. At the same time, the ends of justice will have to be satisfied, and Mr. Lindsay is being detained in Hobart at considerable inconvenience. On the 23rd of April 1892, in the Hobart Mercury, alleged bigamy. The charge preferred against Thomas W. Miller, otherwise known as Lord Lymington, for having on the 28th of March 1892 in Hobart married Jenny Opie, his former wife, to whom he was married to on the 6th of November 1884, at Petersham, New South Wales, being then alive, was commenced. Thomas Stuart Lindsay stated that he'd been lately residing at the Wesleyan Parsonage with his son, the Reverend David Stuart Lindsay, who was a duly appointed minister of the Wesleyan Church. On the 28th of March, he was the officiating minister of the Hobart district, and on that day a marriage was solemnised by his son, at which he officiated as a witness. The names of those married on that occasion were Thomas William Miller and Jenny Opie. He identified them before the court. The marriage was duly entered into the book, and Miller made an affidavit before the ceremony was performed. The Reverend Mr. Lindsay, who performed the marriage, has since been removed to Victoria to take charge of the district at that place. At this stage, the case was further remanded for a week to admit the evidence of witnesses expected to arrive from Sydney to be taken. Bail was allowed in 2 substantial sureties of £200 each, and himself the sum of £500. The accused offered to deposit 500 sovereigns as bail to appear in Sydney, but the bench refused to accept the offer. The accused was committed for trial, with bail being allowed, but which Miller failed to get. He was therefore again arrested. And on the 26th of May 1892 in the Adelaide Advertiser, the bogus girl, Miss Jenny Opie, concerned. At the Criminal Court in Hobart on the 17th of May, before Honour Mr. Justice Adams, Thomas William Miller was charged with bigamy. He pled not guilty. Florence Irish stated that on the 16th of November 1891, her sister, Sarah Jane Irish, was married to the prisoner, Thomas William Miller, at the Baptist Church at Petersham. The prisoner and her sister, Sarah Jane, his wife, lived in apparent happiness together until the 14th of March when he left for Tasmania. There were 2 children by the marriage. His wife, Sarah Jane, was alive on the 28th of March. The prisoner was a surveyor having offices in Pitt Street, Sydney, and he lived with her sister for about 8 years and was apparently an affectionate husband and father. Jenny Opie said that she was married to the prisoner at the Wesleyan parsonage, and the witnesses were Thomas Stewart Lindsay and Janet Lindsay. The prisoner described himself to be a bachelor. The prisoner had passed under the name of Lord Lymington. She shared the honour of the title with him for about 2 weeks before she married him. He was formerly known to her as Tom Miller of Sydney. She'd heard him speak of his father as the Earl of Lymington. She did not know that such was not the case. She had no curiosity on the subject, but simply took his word for it. She was introduced to him early in January last at his office when an acquaintance began, which developed into friendship and intimacy. She accompanied him in his walks of an evening. He introduced her to a lady at his office on one occasion as Mrs. Miller, but said to the witness that this lady was not his wife. Did she say that she was the mother of his children? No. Now be careful. I do not want to distress you in any way, but you must answer my questions. Did you not make a statement that you were told that the woman you were introduced to as Mrs. Miller was the mother of the prisoner's children? I was told so. I said that I was told so. He said that the lady was the mother of his children, but was not his wife. He did not introduce her as his wife, but as Mrs. Miller. And yet knowing all that, knowing that the lady occupied the position of his wife at least, and that she was the mother of his children, you continued your intimacy with him? Yes. He kept you well supplied in money? He did. Plenty of dresses, jewellery and things? Hundreds of pounds spent in jewellery and trinkets? He got them himself? He gave me carte blanche to order what I pleased out of the shops. Did you give the name of Miss Miller at Jones's shop? Yes. And at the other jewellers' shops you went under the name of Mrs. Miller? Yes. You also came down to Melbourne in his company? I did. And remained there some time? Yes. Following up the matter step by step, you went up the country together as Mr. and Mrs. Miller, did you not? Yes. And you subsequently permitted him to occupy the position of protector to you? When did you come over to Tasmania? Really, I cannot tell you. In some part of March, I think. I do not keep a record of every little thing about it. Both at Launceston and Hobart you passed as his wife? Yes. In Hobart you passed as Lady Lymington, did you not? I did. And during this time he was willing to make you his wife? He was, but I refused. But you ultimately became his wife, you know. Well, I did so. And notwithstanding the relationship existing between you both, you steadily refused to marry him? Yes, because I was underage. I was under 21 years and did not wish to get married until I was of age. Were you of age when you married him? Yes, I was 21 years of age on the 24th of March. At least so my mother says, and I suppose she ought to know a little. Do you remember during the early part of your acquaintance that the defendant met an injury? He told me about it. He said he'd struck his head. Did you yourself notice anything strange or eccentric about him? Yes, he was very peculiar in his manner. His conduct was very peculiar for a man of his age, and so I told him. When he drove out with you, was he peculiar? Now, how was his conduct in Hobart? Just about the same as in Sydney. Profuse in his hospitality and lavish in his expenditure? Yes. He officiated as an organist out of Newtown with you, did he not? Yes, I sang. He was very excitable before his arrest, was he not, and had a severe illness afterwards when he was attended by Dr. Crowther? Yes. He became ill after he got married, did he not? Yes, afterwards. After the arrest of the prisoner, did you have a conversation with Reverend Turnbull and Mr. Miller? Yes. Did you not say to each of those gentlemen that you were aware of the fact that the prisoner was married previously? No, I did not. I said, I know now that he is married, but I believe the marriage to be illegal. I did not say before the marriage that I knew Miller was a married man. He assured me that he was not a married man. He introduced me to a Mrs. Miller and said she went by that name but was not his wife. Why did you not take the trouble to inquire if he was a married man? I knew no one in Sydney, or at least very few people to inquire from. You took no steps to inquire whether or not he was a married man? I did not. Don't you think it would have been judicious on your part if you had done so? I don't know, perhaps it might have been. It might have been easy for you. I simply took his word in everything. Why did you object to getting married? I objected to marrying until I was over 21 because I had a letter from my parents stating they did not wish me to be married. The defence lawyer contended that the prisoner was not in his right mind when he contracted the second marriage. He suffered from an injury to the head at one time for which he received medical treatment and was advised to take quiet and rest as a remedy. The moment that he made the acquaintance with Jenny Opie, a change for the worse set in. He became more eccentric and acted more like a lunatic every day. There were in fact two Tom Millers. One was the Honourable Surveyor of Sydney, and the other was the fascinated fool in the toils of one who sought his acquaintance for the sake of the benefits derivable therefrom. She had sought him, not he her. She went to his office to meet him. She was there, introduced to a woman as Mrs. Miller, who she told was the mother of his two children, and yet fully seized of this knowledge, she continued her intimacy and finally wound up by marrying him. She did not apparently possess sufficient knowledge of the world to institute a search into the matter and ascertain for herself whether he was married or not, but she knew enough to postpone her marriage until she became 21, so that she would not infringe on the Marriage Act. The crime of bigamy was one in which the injury inflicted upon the second wife contributed the extent of the punishment to be imposed upon the person committing such a crime, and according to the extent of that injury, so the amount of punishment was meted out. In the case of the reduction of a young girl who surrendered herself to a man who was already married and so wrecked her life and future prospects, the punishment would be necessarily extensive. But in this case there was nothing of the kind apparent. Miss Opie was not a simple childlike maiden who was taken away from her home and her friends by one who wrecked her life by the seductive arts. She knew perfectly well what she was doing. She had reaped considerable profit by the transaction. Money had been lavished upon her, and with it a title. A bogus title perhaps, but to all outside intents and purposes a title still. She had carte blanche to order what she pleased at the jewellers' shops, where she passed herself off as Miss Miller and at another Mrs. Miller. The only person who was annoyed was the prisoner's wife. She, with that forgiving temperament and loving disposition which characterised her relationship to the prisoner, was willing to put aside his indiscretions. It would do her a still greater injury if the prisoner was sent to jail for a lengthened term of imprisonment. John Alfred Miller of Sydney, an uncle of the prisoner, said that prior to his meeting Jenny Opie, he was always quiet and well behaved. His abilities were considerable, he was apparently fond of his family, and his domestic relations were evidently happy. Prior to his meeting Jenny Opie, the accused was of a rational and ordinary temperament and disposition. On seeing the prisoner in Hobart after his intimacy with Miss Opie, the witness noticed a great change. His nephew was deaf and dumb for 6 or 7 days. His mental faculties appeared to be deficient. He was giving absurd replies to ordinary questions and was very excitable at times. He did not realise the seriousness of his position. The witness failed utterly to account for his assumption of the title of Lord Lymington. Up to the time of his leaving Sydney, he was, to all intents and purposes, a sane man. Archibald Turnbull, a Church of England minister, officiating at St John's in Newtown, stated that on the 23rd of March he met the prisoner, who passed himself off as Honorary T.W. Miller and afterwards as Lord Lymington. Miss Opie posed as Lady Lymington. He saw them every day after that, Nelly, and time after time Jenny Opie said to him that she knew that the prisoner was a married man, but she believed it was an invalid marriage because he made no declaration at the marriage. Miss Opie referred to the first wife as Sarah. The prisoner was extremely eccentric. The witness did not believe that on the 28th of March the prisoner was a sane man. He saw him on the 27th in the study. Shortly after his arrest, a few days after, the prisoner was seized with repeated fainting fits. There could be no doubt of their genuineness. He appeared to be insane. The witness based his belief upon the fact that his eccentricities took a form of insanity with which he was perfectly familiar. Miller told him all kinds of tales about the English aristocracy and of the Prince of Wales, some of which witness knew were absurd. Then he frequently went off into convulsions. The witness did not believe that the prisoner had any moral consciousness of what he was doing. On the 28th of March, the prisoner could not distinguish between right and wrong as an ordinary man could. There was no pretence or humbug. He did not know what he was really doing, but his mental condition was such that although he knew that he was doing wrong in one sense, he still persisted in going through the ceremony under the belief that he was someone else and was doing right. Dr. Edward Crowther attended the prisoner and found him in the condition of a man who had recovered from an attack of temporary insanity, which attack had left excessive nervous prostration with deficiency in the vocal powers and in hearing. An injury to the head, joined with an overindulgence in champagne, made up the total. There was a central cause, a blow, and an exciting cause, the champagne. The exciting cause came after the central cause. The champagne and the Lord Lymington hallucination came together. About the time the prisoner contracted the marriage, he must have been in such a condition as to not know what he was doing. He suffered from attacks of nervous prostration, which followed with restoration to reason. He was perfectly sane at the present time, but suffering from nervousness, the effects of the blow plus the champagne causing a state of mental aberration. He had been advised to take rest and quiet. He had done the very opposite, and the result was chaos. He was in such a muddled condition that on the 1st of April he could not very well have known right from wrong on the 28th of March. His Honour, summing up, pointed out the salient points of the case to the jury. That the prisoner had married Miss Opie when he was already married was proven. There was no doubt on that score. The question was really, was the prisoner insane or not when he committed himself to the second marriage? Was the evidence sufficient to warrant the assumption that he was temporarily insane? It was all suppositional evidence. There were no facts proven. The evidence was not called to prove the blow on the head or the overindulgence in alcohol. The jury were not to jump at a conclusion. It should be proven to their satisfaction either one way or another. When a man is totally deprived of his memory and did not know what he was doing any more than an infant, then he should be exempt from punishment. The conduct of the prisoner did not look like a sudden freak. He urged marriage upon Miss Opie frequently. She did not seek it. It was not a sudden idea which seized upon him to marry the girl he had been living with, but it was a result of a preconceived idea. The only plea His Honour could suggest was that the prisoner was really so mad that he did not know right from wrong. Prior to meeting Jenny Opie, he was a perfectly rational human being. He was to all intents and purposes a sane man. Then he apparently became mad. But had that been so, it could not have been noticed by those who came into contact with him. Miss Opie had said that he was peculiar, and the clergyman had given strong evidence. He charged the jury not to allow the question of the amount of punishment to be apportioned out to a guilty man, to bias them in their opinion to be formed as to his possible guilt or innocence. The jury, after a short retirement, returned a verdict of guilty with a strong recommendation to mercy. Miller's lawyer read letters from friends of the prisoner at Sydney bearing testament to the high opinions entertained generally by his acquaintance of his character and ability. He read extracts from one letter written by his wife in touching language, forgiving her husband for what he had done. He asked His Honour to extend his clemency to the prisoner, if only for the sake of his wife, who being the only person wronged and had suffered enough already, and whose sufferings would be increased by the imposition of a lengthy term of imprisonment. His Honour later in the day called the prisoner before him for sentence. He said that the prisoner had been very properly convicted of the crime of bigamy. The jury could do no less. The offence which has been committed was an extremely serious one. As a man of good character and ability, moving in good society, the prisoner had every opportunity of doing better. He was an organist, a musician, and a man of education. He must have been quite aware of the nature of the offence. It would be casting discredit on his judgment if His Honour did not suppose that the prisoner was not aware of the nature of the offence. He was compelled, in considering his punishment, to be grieved to think of the consequences entailed upon the wife and family of the prisoner. His Honour then spoke very feelingly to the prisoner, asking him to reflect upon what he had done and the great injury he inflicted on his wife and family, to whom had written to him so affectionately. He was liable to a term of 7 years' imprisonment for the offence. With regard to the case of Miss Opie, it did not appear that she'd suffered any material injury by the fact of the prisoner, otherwise he would have dealt with him much more severely than he intended to. That young woman had been living with him. He had surrendered his home and given up his wife and family to go strolling about the colony with Miss Opie. He constantly urged her to marry him, but it seemed that she was not disposed to do so. The jury had taken a very lenient view of his case and had recommended him to mercy. His wife was very anxious to receive him back soon. Taken into consideration the kind wishes of his friends and the recommendation of the jury, His Honour would impose a term of imprisonment of 12 calendar months. The prisoner, who'd been showing signs of agitation during the whole time the judge was speaking, at the close of his remarks stepped forward towards the edge of the dock, leading below to the waiting room, and fell forward and downwards headlong in a fainting fit. A week later, on the 2nd of June 1892, in the Hobart Mercury, Miller, the bigamist, Lord Lymington, has been removed from the jail to the General Hospital in accordance with the advice of the Board of Medical Experts, on account of his state of health. He is still accompanied by his valet and other accompaniments of his temporary exaltation. And on the 19th of July 1892, in the Hobart Mercury, the case of T.W. Miller. At a meeting of the Executive Council held yesterday, we are given to understand that T.W. Miller, who recently received a sentence of 12 months for bigamy, came up for consideration and it was decided that he should be released. He He will leave by the next Union Company steamer for Sydney, accompanied by his father, to be under parental care, and return to Sydney, where he reconciled with his wife and lived with her and his family at Dulwich Hill. And Thomas Miller died on the 13th of March 1899 in Newcastle, New South Wales, so only 7 years after this event. In the coroner's inquest on the 15th of March 1899, it was ascertained that the cause of death was effects of cyanide of potassium administered by persons unknown. And on the 15th of March 1896, in the Balranald Moolameen Riverina Recorder, supposed double suicide. A tragedy took place at the Great Northern Hotel in Newcastle yesterday evening of Thomas William Miller, an agent of Sydney, who arrived on Saturday with a young woman whose name is unknown, and both were found dead in the hotel on Monday evening. The woman was found with a sponge over her mouth. On the table was Miller's card, and written upon it was, "She has taken cyanide of potash and I must follow." A tumbler was found alongside the bed. Both deaths indicated no struggle. Miller was the son of Mr. Thomas Miller of Petersham, once manager of the Equitable Building Society. And another article in the Bathurst National Advocate. Tragedy at Newcastle, a man and woman commit suicide. The Great Northern Hotel was the scene of a sensational tragedy this evening when a man, Thomas W. Miller, a civil and mining engineer of Temple Court, Sydney, and a woman whose name is unknown committed suicide by drinking a quantity of cyanide of potassium. From what can be gathered, it appears that both the deceased arrived from Sydney by the midday train on Saturday and engaged in a double room at the Great Northern Hotel and were booked in as Mr. and Mrs. T.W. Miller. The couple were on most affectionate terms and publicly manifested their feelings towards each other to such an extent that their devotion became the subject of general comment in the hotel. They were last seen together at noon today when they were parading the hotel balcony. The woman retired to her room at 1 p.m. and Miller sat down to luncheon in the dining hall and after leaving the table was not again seen alive. The discovery was made by one of the housemaids who went to their room at 5:30 p.m. to summon them for tea, the deceased having intimated their intention of returning to Sydney by the 5:57 p.m. mail train. The chair had been fixed against the door of the room and the housemaid, presuming something had happened, sought the assistance of the porter who forced in the door. Miller and his reputed wife were both found lying on the bed, dead and almost cold. The woman was lying on her back with her mouth covered with a damp sponge and a pillow resting on her body. She was fully attired and bore the appearance of having passed away without a struggle. Miller was lying partially on his side and with the exception of his coat was fully dressed. The bodies were found side by side and there was no indication of resistance. The police were immediately informed and Sergeant Holmes, acting under the instructions of Sub-Inspector Saunders, made an exhaustive investigation into the case. Several business cards were found on Miller, but nothing was found among the effects to establish the identification of the woman. Miller had £4 upon him, in addition to a valuable diamond ring and a gold watch and chain, and the woman also possessed several articles of jewellery. And on the 15th of March 1899 in the Newcastle Morning Herald, a miner's advocate had outlined evidence at the inquest, and the young woman was announced in this newspaper article. An inquest was held into the circumstances surrounding the death of Thomas William Miller and Lizzie Allardyce. Sergeant Holmes stated that from what he observed that the poison had not been forced on the woman. Constable Sparks said at 12:50 p.m. on the previous day he was standing at the corner of Walt and Scott Streets when his attention was drawn to two persons, male and female, on the balcony of the Great Northern Hotel. The man had his right arm around the woman's neck and his left hand was holding up a portion of her left arm. They were walking up and down the balcony, kissing one another. About 12:25 p.m. they entered the room off the balcony by the first door facing Scott Street. They were away a few minutes when they returned to the balcony. They walked up and down 3 times in the same manner as before. When they approached the end of the balcony, the woman pulled herself away from the man's embrace. He went to get a hold of her again, but she moved away. He did this 2 or 3 more times and then proceeded to beat one of his hands on the other. He then entered the hall and about a minute later, he appeared in Watt Street carrying an umbrella in his right hand. The woman, who was still on the balcony, was twirling a handkerchief in her hands. She then came to the corner of the balcony and with the arms folded leant on the handrail of the balcony. When the man had turned into Hunter Street, the woman returned to the room and he never saw either of the parties again alive. Clara Burgess, a waitress at the Great Northern Hotel, said she recollected the man and woman coming to the hotel on Saturday. She waited for them in the number 6 room. They dined together in the public room until Monday, when the man came alone to breakfast, saying Mrs. Miller was not coming down. At lunch he also came alone, saying Mrs. Miller was out. He partook in a hurried lunch, remarking that he had an appointment at 2 o'clock. She did not see the man alive after lunch. She saw the woman in the dining room at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. As far as the witness could see, the man and woman were on the best of terms. They were at the hotel 6 months ago as Mr. and Mrs. Miller, when they remained for 2 days. Thomas Miller, residing at Petersham, said the male deceased was his son, Thomas William Miller, born at Newcastle. He was 36 years of age last birthday. He had visited most of the colonies. He was a mining and civil engineer and patents agent. He was a married man, his wife living at Marrickville with their 2 children, a boy and a girl. As far as he knew, the deceased did not possess any landed property or deposits in banks, and he did not know the woman whose body he had seen at the morgue. Sergeant Holmes said the deceased had been under medical examinations in Sydney and in Hobart, all of which showed that he might at any time develop suicidal tendencies. On one occasion 4 years ago, the witness found a letter in the deceased's coat jacket in which he said he would take cyanide of potassium in order to destroy life. The letter said a few drops would be quite sufficient. Then on the 15th of March 1899, in the Sydney Evening News, Thomas William Miller, the civil engineer who committed suicide at Newcastle a couple of days ago under dramatic circumstances, always lived on the best terms with his wife and appeared the most affectionate of husbands. Speaking today to a lady who joined the Miller household as a companion to Mrs. Miller shortly after the husband's release from jail, a news reporter gleaned some interesting particulars about Miller's home life. The lady in question went to live with Mrs. Miller at a cottage in Druitt Street, Enmore. This was immediately after Miller's release and following on the reconciliation between husband and wife. Their financial circumstances at this time were not very bright, and Mrs. Miller, in order to supplement her husband's income, whatever it was, did dressmaking. From Enmore they moved to Sinclair, Bogan Street, Summerhill, where they lived for some time. She was succeeded in Mrs. Miller's service by her sister, who remained with the family several years until 8 months ago. Miller made repeated trips away, first to Melbourne, then to Brisbane and afterwards to Newcastle. He announced himself as a civil engineer, but that was about all that was known by him by those in the household circle. For some time after moving to Summerhill, Miller was desperately hard up, and his wife again had to resort to dressmaking and dispense with her companion. But 9 months afterwards saw the affairs of the family much brighter. Mrs. Miller was able to give up dressmaking and re-engage in domestic assistance. Not long afterwards, Miller, who appeared to become suddenly rich, purchased a home in Petersham, where his wife and 2 children resided. For a couple of years after Miller returned home, no visitors were received at the house. Just about this time he, however, became reconciled to his own and his wife's relatives and very often entertained. Should a stranger, however, appear on the scene, the man's demeanour changed instantly. He would rarely meet anyone whom he had not known previously, and if such an interview threatened, he always found means to avoid it. Mrs. Miller is spoken of as a pattern of wifely devotion. About 18 months ago, Miller was stricken down with an illness, and until he was convalescent, his wife rarely left his bedside, neglecting even household duties in order to minister to him. If outward show went for anything, Miller was passionately fond of his wife and children. He at all times sought his wife's company, and when at home never was absent from her side. At parting or meeting, he usually embraced her. The double life Miller was leading was apparently never suspected by his wife. Miller's commercial dealings do not show him in too favourable a light, and in a financial sense he contrived to get to windward of those who'd befriended him. He is alleged to have stolen a set of plans belonging to Mr. Stone, a patent agent. Others also have suffered by reason of their acquaintanceship with Miller. The deceased, it is known, dabbled extensively in mining. He actively interested himself in a contrivance for treating cinnabar, and it stated that a sum of money which was given to Miller to pay a mine manager was never handed to the latter. And another article in the Daily Telegraph of Sydney on the same day says there is something romantic as well as sensational about Miller's past history. A comparatively young man, only 35 years of age, he seems to have spent most of his time in carrying on sorts of deceptions and amorous intrigues. Many people have been misled by Miller from time to time. As one gentleman put it yesterday in conversation with a representative of the paper, he was the most plausible man I ever came across. He could talk you round from one view to another in a remarkable way. Before he started business as a mining engineer, he was employed by J.J. Stone and Smedley, engineers and patent agents in Sydney. He'd been treated very kindly by Mr. Stone, and after being released from prison, Mr. Stone was the first man to help him on his feet again. So Mr. Stone gave him some work in his office to keep him going, and not long after, a number of valuable patent plans were missed from the office. Miller had shown his gratitude to Mr. Stone by stealing these plans from his office, for they were afterwards recovered by virtue of a search warrant. Among those who have said to have been victimised by Miller are Mr. Clayton of Tattersall's building in Hunter Street, Mr. Perrott of the Mercantile Bank Chambers, the corner of George and Market Streets, Mr. White, a solicitor of Pitt Street, Mr. Mellinson of Vicary's Chambers, with whom he at one time was in partnership, and Dr. Purster of Lewisham. Some time ago, Miller became concerned in a patent furnace for treating cinnabar and other minerals, invented by Mr. Foote, and his action in connection was such as to cause Mr. Foote to draw the attention of the police authorities to him. Since that time, a couple of detectives have been shadowing Miller. In some way or another, he got into a syndicate that is working the cinnabar mine at Lyonsville above Grafton and engaged a man to make some 40,000 bricks for erecting the patent furnace referred to. And when the bricks were made, he would not pay the man who made them. As he served a number of other men in the locality in the same way, a writ was the other day issued against him. Strange to say, the manager of the mine, who was at present residing at Newtown, where he was last seen last night, knew nothing about Miller until he received an anonymous letter couched in the following terms. Sir, you are mixed up with two of the greatest scoundrels in Sydney, in fact both jailbirds. Everyone here knows. Tell that to Mr. Callip. They will have all his money and more than likely do something to get him into prison. We've opened the eyes of Mr. C and Dr. Warren. Now take warning. Yours truly, the man in the gutter. Mr. K-Tip is closely identified in the work of the mine, and Mr. John C is concerned in a block of land close by, which Miller approached him about. The manager of the mine had his eyes opened, and he learnt that a sum of £510 had been given to Miller, but had not been handed over. In the Sydney Australian Star on the 16th of March 1899, the remains of the male victim of the tragedy, Thomas William Miller, was interred in the congregational portion of Sandgate Cemetery this afternoon. The scene was very sad, the relatives of the deceased man being almost prostrated. And then on the 18th of March 1899, in the Clarence and Richmond Examiner of Grafton. The inquest did not throw any light on the subject of the probable motive for the tragedy. A theory put forward is that Miller, during the morning, broached to his companion the subject of the severance of their connections, and as a consequence he found, when he returned to the hotel, after being absent for half an hour or so, his paramour had poisoned herself. He then went down to lunch alone, and during his hurried meal came to the conclusion that the best way out of the difficulty he had to face was to end his own existence. Having so resolved, he went upstairs and straightway took the fatal dose. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, the jury returned a verdict that Thomas William Miller died from the effects of cyanide of potassium poisoning, self-administered, and Elizabeth Alardis also from the effects of cyanide of potassium poisoning. By what means she came to receive the dose, there was not sufficient evidence to show. On the 20th of March 1899 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, the Supreme Court of New South Wales, in the estate of Thomas William Miller, late of Dulwich Hill near Sydney in New South Wales, civil engineer, deceased interstate. Application will be made that the above-named deceased estate will be granted to Sarah Jane Miller, the widow. In part 2, I'll be covering the women that were involved in William's life, his wife, his children, and also Jenny Opie and Elizabeth Alardis.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.